Hello.
Hi.
Hi, Rachel.
Hi, Shannon. So glad to be here.
Yes. Hi, everybody at home, too, or wherever you may be.
Yeah.
Well, welcome to our live signing today. I am so excited that everyone who's joining us, we're going to answer questions. We're going to talk about the book. We're going to do all kinds of things. I love to be able to connect with people. Rachel, when you have a book out, you had a bestseller out around Christmas time that shared a lot about the Fox family and our traditions, those kinds of things. So I love this bit of interaction that we get to have with folks. I am signing books as we go. And we'll talk about the book and any other things that you want to ask about. So Rachel and I'm glad we have this time together.
I am too. I feel like we are on a lot of date nights these days, Shannon.
I know, because you're so generous with your time. Because, as a mother of 9 and a professional woman, you have so much extra time. But I'm greatly appreciative.
My kids are so happy because tonight is pizza night, thanks to Shannon Bream.
It is my gift to the family, to the Duffy family tonight.
Well, listen, there are tons of people that have lots of questions. And so I guess, can we get started with that? Or do you want to say something first, Shannon?
Well, why don't I tell a little bit about the book, and then I'm happy to answer questions. So this is the second book. You have it here, Mothers and Daughters of the Bible Speak. And by the way, I love these covers. I can't take any credit for any of these. The first one was a light blue with the flowers. This is pink, which I'm a little partial to. I love it. Mm-hmm. And if you can notice, the writing is aqua on here. This is how good my husband is. You got a great husband too. My husband found pens that match the print on here.
Oh, I love it.
Such an attention to detail. Me, I'm like, is the dog barking? Do we have some food in the refrigerator? Like, I'm flying by the seat of my pants all the time. And he's like, look at these pens I ordered you that match perfectly. So when I sign and you see the aqua, you can think of Shannon Bream. That was his one of his many contributions to this whole thing. So he's really good about that kind of stuff, about the details. So yeah, the second book is now Mothers and Daughters of the Bible Speak. And it's not just moms and daughters, because not all of us are moms, or if you pick up this book, daughters. There are stories about mothers and sons. There are fathers and daughters. And there are all kinds of stories here that are about families. Some of them really faithful, following God's plan and God's path. Others who, just like in the first book, it is not sanitized. The Bible is full of dysfunctional people and families, which I find, Rachel, I don't know about you, encouraging, because God uses flawed people. He uses our mistakes and our messes. And I am always in need of forgiveness and mercy. And I love that God says, I'm not just using perfect people. I can use anybody if they're willing. And so we have that. We have all kinds of different family relationships in this book. And so we're just sort of looking at faith through the prism of womanhood, of mothers, of daughters, and of those crazy, sometimes family dynamics.
I love that. There is so much to be gathered from that, because it's true. We all feel bad. We feel like we're the only family that's dysfunctional. We're the only family that has all these problems. And you read the Bible and you're like, wow, it was worse from
the beginning of time. I talked to somebody today about the fact that one of the father-daughter pairs that we have in the book is King Saul and his daughter Michal, who was wildly in love with David. I mean, he was the guy. He was just a shepherd boy, but he was racking up these battles. He defeated Goliath. And Saul really started to see him as a rival, because David had people cheering for him. Saul has killed his thousands. David has killed his 10,000s. And he actually uses his daughter Michal, who was truly desperately in love with David. And we don't see that expressed in the Bible a lot, but this woman who really had this emotion and this heart for him. And Saul, I think, kind of sees her as like a bargaining chip. Like, hey, if I marry her off to him, I'm always going to kind of have maybe a spy in the midst of what this guy is doing. And he gives David this nearly impossible task to do, to win the hand of Michal, to go and slay all these Philistines, which I'm sure there's some part of Saul that's like, he's probably going to get killed. But maybe he didn't calculate the fact that David would not only kill the 100, he would kill 200 and then come back to even more praise. So Michal is caught in the middle of this thing. Saul also repeatedly tries to kill David. So you may have some tension with your in-laws, but unless they're actively trying to murder you, it's not any worse than what we've seen in the Bible. So God understands the drama, the tension, and families where people have really been hurt. I mean, God is not unaware of that.
Yeah, no, that's so true. I want to ask you, Shannon, because I know other people are going to have a lot of questions, but I want to make sure I get my question into Shannon Bream first. You have so many great stories in here. Who is the person that you most relate to in all of the characters in this specific book?
Hmm. Gosh, I mean, we really see, you want to be the very first story we talk about is Jochebed and Miriam, this mother-daughter combo, who were really brave and really faithful. And I want to hope that I would be like them. I mean, we also have a story that's a very small story in the book as well. We don't even know the woman's name, but the prophet Elijah was traveling at a time there was great famine in the land. And he comes upon this woman. God has told him to go to this town. He meets her, and God says there'll be somebody there to assist you. And this woman is there, and he says, "Can I please get something to drink?" So not only is he asking for something really difficult at that time, she's going. And on the way, he says to her, "By the way, could you give me something to eat too?" And she just levels with him the truth and says, "You know what? I have this little bit left. I was going to make a final meal for my son and I, and then we're going to die." I mean, that's how dire the circumstances were for this famine and this drought and what was going on. But she doesn't say no. She trusts him. There is a miracle coming, but it's really her faith that helps to trigger that, because she's like, "Okay, I'll go do it." And she does. And what happens is not only is she able to provide a meal for him and to tend to him as God had promised him, but because of that, her flour and her oil does not run dry until the end of this famine and this terrible destruction. So she was faithful enough when she was at the end of her rope to step up and say, "I'm going to serve someone else who is asking me for help." And I just love that. I mean, it really reminds me kind of my mom and the way that she would operate. So it's more that I aspire to these women and to the great faith that they had than I can say I've arrived at that point.
Oh, that's such a beautiful story. It's so interesting too, because, famine seems like something that happened a long time ago, although we know that it's happening in Afghanistan, it's happening in lots of places.
Mhm.
And this is kind of the first news. I know they talk about that in our work and our profession. This is the first time in a long time that I've heard conversations about food supply and famine and just so many crazy things happening in our own world right now, and what solace we can get from the Bible to know that these are all things that we all faced, that
Mhm.
people have faced throughout history.
Mhm.
And God willing, we don't have to face these kinds of decisions. But the truth is, we don't know what's in the future.
Yeah.
We don't know what we're going to be facing, and it's so interesting how God, as you said, is testing us at times to see
Mhm.
what our faith is, and that is a beautiful story.
Yeah, and he's faithful. I mean, even when we're not, because let's face it, I'm sometimes not. I was talking to someone today about, you may have had this experience where you feel like God is prompting you to do something, and sometimes it doesn't make sense. I think he often calls us to that. And we can see that all throughout the Bible too. But, to stop and maybe talk to somebody in the grocery store, like God's telling you, like, "Hey, they need some encouragement," or
Yes.
maybe they're in a crisis and you're like, "Oh, this is so weird. Don't make me do this." And I'm like, from the gym, no makeup on. They're going to think I'm a weirdo. But I've had moments like that in my life where I feel like God has said, or to stop and give someone money or something that maybe seems weird or doesn't make sense. But I feel like you end up getting blessed in the process. I mean, he's thrilled by our obedience, and, we're to listen to him and not to the world, which they're going to clash sometimes for sure.
That is very, very true. That is very, very
I'm going
true.
to sign while we're talking.
Okay. So do you want me to get started? Because I have so many people that have questions, Shannon.
Sure.
Can we go? Okay.
Anytime. I will try to answer and sign at the same time.
Some of these questions are related to the book, and some of them are just about you. So this first one is about you, and it says, have you ever considered moving to more opinionated news time slots within your network? If not, why or why not?
I have a lot of opinions and I bite my tongue a lot. I think that that's my job right now. I mean, as part of the news division, I think all of us as human beings, especially because there are things that are we can all feel very passionate about in the news right now. So I see that I have a responsibility. It's a great privilege too, to be in the news side. And to make sure that, Rachel, if you have people yelling at you, like, "You're so, taking your points from the talking points from the White House, and why do you hate Republicans?" And the other side, they're like, "You're so in the tank for Trump, and you always defending him." And it's like,
No
listen, if
way.
you're defending it from both sides, I think people are projecting a lot of their own frustrations and emotions. But I feel like if that's happening, then I'm doing my job, because my job is to present the news, the facts, dig on these stories, find out what we can. And I think our viewers are very smart people, and I trust them to come to their own conclusions. I read a lot of different and watch a lot of different media because I want to know the whole conversation that's going on out there. And I think our folks do too. I think I do meet some people like I met this weekend. They're like, "We turned on Fox in 1996 and it's never left our TV ever since."
I met those people.
And we're like, "Thank you. We love that." that. But I do think a lot of people bounce around to different news, options and outlets out there. So I want to make sure that when they visit us, and especially on Fox News at night, my team, it works really hard to make sure that we are down the middle and present all sides for you. And I think that's my assignment.
Yeah, I think you do it really well. And I think people do appreciate that. And I think what's so great about our network too, Shannon, is that, we have shows that are opinionated and
Right.
we label them as that. We're
Right.
not trying to pass them off as the news.
That's the difference.
That is the difference.
Yeah.
And I appreciate that. Or then you get a hybrid show like Fox and Friends where we deliver the news, but we're allowed to say what we think about it. And as a very opinionated Latina, I like that part of my job.
I do too. You guys are entertaining, and I think you speak for a lot of viewers who have strong opinions and different feelings. And nobody's monolithic about everything that they believe. Or there's no. I mean, even my husband and I, as much as we're on the same page, and you guys probably too, we don't agree on every single thing.
Not.
So.
Yeah.
But I think people like to know what's going through your head, and I'd love to hear what you have to say.
Well, I'm friends with Shannon, so I get to hear what she really thinks. I'm not going to tell anyone though. All right.
The secrets.
That's right. Okay. This person says, I'm thoroughly enjoying your previous book, Women of the Bible Speak. What pairing was closest to your heart when researching that book?
Let me think about the first one. I mean, honestly, we had pairings, which I loved because I really thought I wanted to include Rahab in that book, who is a prostitute. And, when we're putting together the first book, I think there were probably some people scratching their head like, what are we doing? And why are we putting her with Queen Esther? But I loved the contrast of these two women. That one was highly exalted. She was placed in this, position of royalty, and she had to find bravery. She hesitated at first, but she found the bravery she needed to save all the Jewish people spread across the Persian Empire. And then you have Rahab, who was an innkeeper, believed to be a prostitute as well, but she was also placed in the exact right place so that when the Israeli spies, the Jewish spies came, she helped them and she hid them, and she was faithful in helping God's people to score an enormous victory and to move forward as a nation in their history. So I love the juxtaposition of those two, and I loved putting them together. And I think once we started writing and getting it together, people got it and said, well, yeah, I love that God uses people in all walks of life, in small ways and big ways. And he puts you exactly where he needs you to be at the moment. He then asks you to be courageous.
Shannon, this is my own question. I mean, your first book, and hopefully your second one here will have the same success. But I mean, I knew it was going to be successful. I just didn't know it was going to be as successful as it was. What do you think? I'm sure you've thought a lot about that. Why did this book do so darn well? I mean, it was on. How long was it on the New York Times bestseller list?
I think like 16 weeks.
I mean, it's incredible.
The New York Times loved having a Fox published book, because this is a Fox book, and a book about the Bible on their list for 16 weeks. Yes. I love it. It's just, to me, like, I can't believe it, but I also think it's kind of funny. When I was writing it, it was really in the first terrifying months of the pandemic, when we had so much we didn't know. People were anxious. They were isolated from their faith communities, from their families, from their routines. Kids were home. People are trying to juggle work, getting sick, losing people they loved. I mean, it was just so overwhelming. And so I wrote the book during those first few months. And it was such a gift to me, because it encouraged me. It reminded me that God is not unaware and that he suffered like we do. And I came out of that feeling like, gosh, I really hope these stories will inspire people. And I think that even if they had a passing knowledge of them, unless you've really studied the Bible, I learned a ton about these women that I didn't know. And I think for some reason, people who might not pick up a Bible or go into an in-depth study would pick up one of these books and feel like, oh my gosh, I can totally relate to these women. And they went through universal things that we struggle with today, whether it's widowhood, war, famine, infertility, financial disaster, illness. I thought, gosh, everybody's walked through that the last year or two. And so I think in some way, people felt like, I love seeing these women's stories broken out and illuminated for all of us. We put study questions. So I'd hear from people who said, I'm doing this as a group, and we're doing this in Bible study or at church. And for some reason, it was the right place at the right time. And I think people needed encouragement. And in many ways, I think that's what it was.
Yeah. I have to tell you, as a Catholic, we focus so much. We read from the Old Testament once every Sunday, we have the first reading is always from the Old Testament, but we don't focus as much on the Old Testament stories as much as the gospel. And so for me, it was really great. I felt like, that's something that I needed for my own spiritual development. And so I really appreciated being able to go deep. I always been a little jealous. You Protestants always know your Bible a little bit better than we
Well,
do. You guys can run off the quotes and the scriptures
well,
right
I
off the top of your head.
I think part of that, first of all, I went to Christian school too, and I know Catholic school is very much this way. I mean, you learn more scripture. I went to a Christian school K through 12. My mom was a teacher there. Then I went to an evangelical university, Liberty University, go Flames.
Yeah.
And so I literally was one class away from a theology minor. I should just go back and take it online so I can say a theology minor. So I was constantly being poured into in ways that I didn't even fully realize at the time. But I do love that in times of real crisis and fear in my life, that I do have verses that come to mind. But one thing I really loved with the first book, and I hope people will feel this way with this one too, is that I've heard from Jewish people who say, I do love that you included so much of the Old Testament and stories that I know and that are so meaningful to my faith are in this book. And I'm learning more about Esther, about Deborah, about these amazing women, Hannah, and we could go on and on from the Old Testament. So I love that people of different faith traditions and denominations will hopefully find encouragement in these stories.
Yeah, it's super unifying, like it reminds us that we're all really, no matter what, connected by the Bible, by our faith. Shannon, can you put your finger on that time and place in your life that you feel God and the Holy Spirit reached out, touched you, and changed your life forever? Mine came attending Bible camp in Eastern Montana in my early teen years.
You know what? I would say a summer camp experience too, because like I said, I grew up in a home where my parents divorced when I was very young, and my mom was sort of a baby Christian, and she grew in her faith and was growing me in my faith at that same time that we would talk about the Bible. And there were times when we really had to rely on our faith to get us through some really difficult financial and other struggles. So she was constantly modeling that for me. And I went to a Christian school, so I could quote the verses and I knew the stories. But I came to a point where I was like, okay, I have to make a decision here at some point. Like, I have to accept what Christ has done for me and say, that's the payment for my sins and for my flaws as a human being. And he's my salvation. And I was also at a summer camp, I think between 7th and 8th grade, where I was like, okay, I need to make this personal, not just that it's my family's faith or that I go to church or I know about this, but I have to make this decision and this commitment. And I say, it's a journey. We'll never be perfect this side of heaven. Jesus was the only one who would be perfect this side of heaven. But he knows our walk and our struggle, and he knows our hearts, that sometimes we fall down. He is always there to pick us back up. In fact, I'm reading this fantastic book I keep recommending to everybody called Gentle and Lowly by Dane Ortland. I wonder if anybody out there has read it.
I've never heard of it. I'm going to write it down.
It's really good because it's like, I think sometimes we can get in our hearts and minds like, God is so disappointed in me. Why do I keep flubbing up with the same sin or making this mistake? Or why did I say that hurtful thing? Or why did I sin? I'm trying to fight these things. And instead of feeling like he is there ready to drop the hammer on us, like, what a disappointment you are. This book reminds me through scripture, not through just fluffy, weird feelings and stuff, like going to show like, no, God is like rooting for us. Like, we are his children. I was reading this morning in Romans where it said, even while we were still sinners, we didn't care anything about him, didn't want anything to do with him. He died for us. So now that we're actually grafted into his family and he loves us and cherishes us as our children, of course he is cheering for us. Just like Rachel with your kids, I'm sure there've been maybe once or twice you've lost your temper, but you didn't stop loving them. And we have to remember that mindset with God, that he does want us to turn away from the sinful and bad things in our life, but he's always rooting for us. And I love that thought that he really is, wants us to succeed, and he loves us unconditionally.
Yeah, that is just so true. Let me go to this one here. What is the piece of advice that you would give someone who's just graduating college and entering into the workforce? What a great question to ask Shannon Bream.
That is a great question, because I feel like
and this is from Kendra from Illinois, by the way.
Okay, Kendra, thank you for the question. I think all of us are going to have that moment as a young adult, whether we're coming out of school or the military, high school, whatever your path is. We're sort of like, okay, what do I do with my life now? What does God have planned for me? And I think it's okay to sort of falter around and search and maybe try different things, try different jobs. I think that for me, I went to law school. My dad, tell the story all the time, kind of half joking, but not really, was like, you're going to law school or med school, so pick one. I mean, he knew I was a good student, and I think he wanted me to have the best opportunities and, employment security and all those kinds of things. He was thinking that way. My mom was a teacher, so education was big in my house. But I feel like I went to law school because I really wasn't sure what to do coming out of a business degree. But I knew I liked law and politics, and I would do something with that. And I went to practice at a firm for a while and hated it, if I'm being honest. It was not what I wanted to do. And so, for a few years there, I would just tell myself, like, it's going to get better. It's going to be a better fit. You're going to grow into this job. And I just didn't love it. I've always been a news junkie, and that was the path I wanted to pursue. So really the toughest phone call when I started taking these steps to change my career was to my dad, to say, like, I think I'm going to leave the practice of law and pursue something else. Like, I put it off and put it off and put it off until I could, work up the courage to tell my dad. So, I mean, I joke around that I had my midlife crisis at like 29, 30 years old. And it's okay to keep searching and don't feel like you're tied to exactly what your major is if you went to college, what you studied. I meet people all the time who are using totally different skills. Everything you do has benefit. You're going to gain something from it, whether it's networking or skills or life lessons. But don't feel like you have to have everything figured out at 23 or 24 because very few people actually do. So it's okay to keep searching. And also, I always tell people the best advice is, like, don't take no for an answer, because you're going to hear it a lot no matter what you do. You can't do it that way. You're not cut out for that. You're not right for this job. Whatever it is, it should only encourage you and make you stronger. If you have a passion, if you feel like you have a direction, once you get to the place where you feel like you've sort of figured that out, you're going to hear no, but it doesn't really mean anything. I heard no a lot, and I still do. Rachel, when it's like you're
yeah.
some answers and people are like, I don't want to talk to you. I'm going to keep hearing it. I'm sure, Rachel, your kids say no sometimes too.
I hear no a lot. I hear no a lot. Actually, it's interesting because I think law is, I have a daughter who's just graduating from college, just like Kendra, who's interested in possibly going to TV. And because of me looking at your career, Megan Kelly, other women that I know, I think that law school is great preparation, probably some of the best preparation for TV work and news. Okay, so let's move on. What are your favorite? This is from Virginia, TJ in Virginia. He wants to know, what is your favorite stories that you do cover in journalism?
I am a total nerd, and that I do really love the Supreme Court stuff.
Can't tell that you love that.
I mean,
I know
I really do. I love reading the briefs. I love going to the arguments. That part of being a lawyer, I love, like, using it to cover the court. I love that. And I get excited about it. And sometimes, over the years as a reporter, I even selling to my bosses, like, oh my gosh, there is this case about the EPA. You're going to die. We got to cover it. And they're like, what?
Ratings.
So, I get really excited. But the thing is, I want people to know how that case matters to their life. And one of the big EPA cases we did, it was about these people that could not use their land that they had planned to build on, because every once in a while when it would rain, I'm going to get this wrong, this is like 10 years ago, there would be like a puddle. And so that would count as retaining water. And they were getting fined something crazy like $75,000 a day because they wanted to use this land in a way the EPA had told them they couldn't. I think they ended up winning that case. But the thing is, some of these cases sound very wonky and esoteric, but they really matter. Many of them to your life. And so I love to have the opportunity to go in, watch the arguments, trying to figure out what the justices are ultimately going to do as we wait for their votes. But more importantly, just to let people at home know what it matters to them in their lives. So those I love.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we're going to have this huge, potentially a huge decision on abortion coming up. When will that be, Shannon?
It could be any day. We actually are getting opinions again on Thursday, but anytime between now and the end of June when the term technically ends. So that case out of Mississippi is a law they passed there banning most abortions after 15 weeks. And so it appeared to those of us who went to the arguments that it seems like they're going to uphold that Mississippi law. I would be my guess, my educated guess at this point. So the question then is, do they go after Roe v. Wade and the underpinnings of that from decades ago? That's really my question at this point. I would my guess would be that the Mississippi law survives, and we have to see how far that decision goes. But it could be monumental to people on both sides of the pro-choice, the pro-life decision. And what happens there, essentially, even if they did chip away at Roe, or say it's not good law or it wasn't decided well, if they decide to do that, it really sends this whole thing back to the states. So people who tell you, oh, abortion is going to be completely illegal in this country, that's not accurate. It's really going to depend on the state where you live and what your lawmakers have decided to do.
Yeah, it's fascinating stuff. I can't wait to see you covering that. This one sounds similar to the one I just asked. I'm going to move on. What inspired you to write about women in the Bible? And you kind of answered that a little bit, but specifically about women. Why women?
Yeah, Fox actually came to me a couple of years ago, like I said, in the beginning of the early parts of the pandemic, and said, we're thinking about publishing a few books. We want to try this. And we are interested in women in the space of religion. We know your faith you're open about it. It's very important to you. Would you want to tackle this project? And normally I would say, okay, let me think about it and pray about it, talk about it with my husband. Like, we all are so busy. But I immediately said yes, because I thought, what a gift this is. What a great idea. And, sometimes people say to me, like, I didn't know these stories were in there. And I'm like, well, these stories about women have always been there. I think sometimes there is a focus on the strong men of the Bible, and we can learn a lot from them too. But you hear about Moses or Paul in the New Testament, or whatever it is. But there are women, and their stories are woven through, not as secondary characters. Some of them are like the star of these shows. And I think it's important that God included all throughout the Old and New Testament these women we can learn from, whether they were faithful or whether they were flawed. There's something to learn from all of them. So I hear from people a lot like, gosh, I'm surprised these were all tucked into the Bible. So we're not inventing anything new. These stories are amazing on their own. We're just putting them in a different format that hopefully people are more comfortable picking up, and maybe it's easier for them to study. So this was Fox's idea. I think, there was divine intervention. So I'm really thankful.
I definitely think so.
Gave me this opportunity to write these
books.
I
mean, I think America wanted it. I mean, it's obvious from the way it rose into the charts of the New York Times bestseller, but I think it's the timing when it came, just around that you wrote it during the pandemic. It came after that. We're all still reeling from that, and as you said, so many people have been separated from their faith. We saw churches close for the first time, I think, ever in America, and a lot of people got out of the habit of going to church. And, I think this book is a reminder of what really matters. Here's a question from Peyton in Georgia. What's your favorite thing to do with your family?
Ooh,
That's a good question.
I love to eat. That's what I'm
I started ordering food just before this thing.
We're already ordering our dinner for after this. My husband's out of town. So Tessa, the amazing Tessa, my assistant, and I are like, what are we going to do? And there's always this default setting. I hate to say it, but it's true. It's like, if we can't decide what to do for dinner, we're like, Chick-fil-A. I mean,
of course,
it comes right to the door over here, and it's like they drop it off and we're good to go. I should not say eating. My husband is actually an amazing cook, and that's why we're eating Chick-fil-A, because he's gone and he cooks dinner for us every night, which is really good. We have our Biscuit, our crazy 2-year-old lab, who's a total sweetie. We love to take her hiking, and there's so many trails around our house, and so that's a really fun way to get some, wear her out, get some fresh air. And a lot of times, my husband and I have the best talks on those walks, where you're not looking at your phone and you're just kind of having conversation and catching up, because the busyness of life a lot of times makes it hard to do that. Yeah. He and I love to travel though too. And we never stopped traveling during the pandemic. So,
good for you.
But there are a lot of places that we couldn't go. I mean, borders that were closed and that kind of stuff.
Sure.
So we're looking forward to the world, even though we've done a little bit of international, we're looking forward to the world opening up a little bit more, so that we never stopped going to see family, and we did that in the safest way possible. And that meant a lot to us. So we're looking forward to picking up and doing a little bit more international travel, but we love to do that. Always learn something.
My parents, my family got COVID in November around, whatever. And so my parents actually did like what you weren't supposed to do. They actually moved. We're like, we already had COVID. So my parents moved in with us for like a month over Christmas, and everything was shut down, and it was so lonely in their condo in Arizona. So they're like, we're going to go get some craziness from the Duffy family. So we kind of did that too. What's your favorite place to visit? Your favorite destination that you've ever been to with your husband?
Listen, domestically, we don't agree on this, because I'm a beach girl and he's a mountain guy. I'm born and raised in Florida, seventh generation Floridian. So every time I can get home there, the Panhandle is my favorite, the most beautiful beaches. I love it there. Santa Rosa, 30A, that whole area. Domestically, if I have a long weekend and I can get there, and luckily DC has direct flights. I love to get there. He absolutely loves Vail. Someone brought it up this weekend. We do love Colorado. Somebody brought up Vail, and I said that's actually my husband's love language is Vail.
It's beautiful there for sure.
Yeah, it is beautiful.
It's gorgeous. How do you do it? How do you do it, Shannon? How do you stay afloat with so much going on? Work demands, travel. This is from Rachel in Dallas.
We should be asking Rachel this question. She's the one who has 9 kids and somehow manages to pull all this off. You know what? Rachel, I don't know how you feel about this, but people talk about balance, and I feel like you can't always have balance. I mean, there are seasons when you're going to be like just trying to keep your head above water. And there are going to be seasons where you have time to reflect and be with people that you love and read and do all these things that for me are very comforting and calming. Right now, I'm just kind of in the washing machine. Like you're just flying around, you're trying to get done what you can. And I don't know that there's a perfect way to balance. For me, there is that setting in the morning of it's really important for me to read scripture, to pray. I like to journal too. I can see things over.
Good for you.
Yeah. And I have a prayer list for people because goodness, some days I'm overwhelmed. Like I'm not going to get through this whole list. Like, Lord, you know, every need here, and I need you to intervene and heal. And our family's had a tough year. We've lost 3 people this year. And so I think we all need prayer and we all need some centering. And it reminds me that, listen, this day is going to get hectic and crazy. There will be people who do not love you on social media and otherwise. None of that matters. You are a daughter of the King. And we know in the end, good triumphs over evil. And so I just have to have that setting in the morning. That's
I love that
balance I sort of have.
Oh, I love that. I love that. So are you a morning prayer person? Or, I mean, I'm sure you do both, but where do you get your best prayer?
The thing I love about it is, you know, you can do it anytime. I mean, I can be sitting in a Supreme Court hearing, and I've been emailing with Benjamin Hall, our colleague who was really badly injured and was there as we lost 2 of our other colleagues over in Ukraine. And I told him, I said, when you come to mind, I just stop and pray for you. It doesn't have to be anything formal. I just, in my heart, I'm like, Lord, I know he needs your healing today. He's in pain. I know that please work with his medical team, whatever. I love that it can be so informal. But I do try to in the morning do a little bit more formal, saying like, God, I'm laying myself before you here. And I need the Holy Spirit. I need your intervention in my life to keep me from the things that would distract me from you, to remind me that it's going to be okay. I pray for our leaders. I pray for President Biden and Vice President Harris. I pray for leaders around the country and around the world because they need wisdom right now. So my most focused prayer is probably that time I try to set aside in the morning. And then my husband and I have a little book we read at night. He generally waits up for me. He's not a nighttime person, but I think I've turned him into one. It's just a little kind of thought on marriage for the day. And then we pray for whatever our biggest kind of concerns and requests are before we go to sleep. And I like that feeling.
Yeah, that's a beautiful thing to do with your husband, actually. I wish my life was like a little bit more like yours in the morning. You know what I do is
we're having pizza night, and that's a good night right there.
Yeah, we're having pizza night. You know, in the morning, it can be so hectic with all the kids and getting them off.
Yes,
and we try to pray with them before they leave the door. And, you know, sometimes we'll get in an Our Father or Hail Mary. But when we're really busy, we say the world's fastest prayer.
Can you do it for us?
Yeah. Jesus, I trust in you. Okay, bye, guys.
Perfect. And honestly, that's all you need. I mean, God doesn't ask us to do some perfectly formal, lofty thing. Like he literally hears us if all we can say is like, Lord, please help me. That's
right. That's right. Shannon, this is from Jim. He's in Colorado, Centennial, Colorado. And he says, you are such an amazing personal role model. I can't wait to read this book. For someone roughly your age with no direction and little happiness and unfortunately no faith, what would be your favorite chapter and story to start with? What a great question.
That is. And I'm so sorry that people are in place of feeling discouragement. I've been there, Rachel. I know you've been there. That's just real life. And I hate to feel like when people are in that season, but know that you're not alone. Know that God is with you. A good chapter may be Naomi and Ruth. I mean, these are women who Naomi and her husband had fled from their homeland because there was great famine and they were desperate. They end up in Moab. They've got 2 sons who married 2 women there. And it sounds like a happy family until tragedy strikes. And so Naomi's husband passes away, then both of her sons pass away. So
Mhm.
these three women in that time and in that society would have been left in a terrible position, not only grieving the loss of your partner, the love of your life, but they also were not protected physically. They weren't protected financially. They would not have had a provider at that time. So I can only imagine how stark and how discouraging their life felt and looked to them. So Naomi at one point decides she's going to go home, and she says to her two young daughter-in-laws, like, you can rebuild your lives. You can start over. This is how it works. Go back to your families. Even if you waited for me to find a husband, have a son 20 years from now for you to marry him, like it's just not realistic. Go start a new family and start your life over. And I'm going to go home because the famine situation had improved and she was going home. So her daughter-in-laws are weeping and saying, no, we don't want to leave you. And she finally convinces Orpah, her one daughter-in-law, to go and start a fresh life with her family. And Ruth decides to go with her. And it's that speech we always hear in weddings, like, ask me not to leave you or to turn away from you. Your people will be my people. Your God will be my God. And entreat me not to leave you. And so even though we look at that in the marriage context, I love that Ruth is saying that to Naomi because they're going to live in poverty and unprotected. Even just making that journey home was dangerous for them. So if you're feeling discouraged and you're in a bad place, that's probably a really good story to read because these women found themselves in that same situation with real struggles. And you can see how God works through their story, through them committing to each other as a, mother and daughter by choice, not just by blood,
Right.
but by marriage and by choice. And I think there's real encouragement in their story and how God works to help them.
Lovely. I'm gonna go get some water in a second
Okay.
here.
I
But
need to get you a Chick-fil-A shake.
I'm going to start with this. This is from Jackie in Ohio. She is an alum of Liberty. I'm going to leave you with this question, and then I'm going to go get some water really quick.
Okay.
Favorite memory at Liberty?
Oh,
Isn't
oh
that
my
good?
goodness. Go Flames. Okay, Rachel's going to get some water as I continue to sign. Oh my gosh, I have so many great memories at Liberty. And when I go back now, for those of you who go back now, wow, the campus is crazy and so nice. It was not like that when we were there. They were working on it, but it was really about the mission more than anything else. And I hope that will always be the case with the school, that it's about the underlying mission, to spread the gospel and to, share his message of redemption with the world. But I met my husband there. So I have a lot of good memories about that. The Vine Center, which is our basketball arena there, they had just built the Vine Center while we were there. I'm dating myself. They had built the Vine Center, and I can remember we had a mutual friend who was always trying to put us together. We met at the homecoming game my senior year, but we were both dating other people. So it wasn't until we both had broken up with other people that we ended up dating. But one of my first memories was going to a basketball game at the Vine Center when I had just started talking to him, and I came out and he had left a note on my car. And it said that he was going to be over at Shakers. And if you went to Liberty or you know Lynchburg, Shakers is this off-campus restaurant. Well, I, the nerd that I am, was heading to a study group in the library. But I took that little note, and we still have it somewhere. I took that note off of my car and I went over to Shakers and I put it back on his car and said, well, I'm going to be at the library. If you have a chance, come over and see me. And I don't think he knew where the library was. So, there was a lot of back and forth there, but eventually the note ended up back on my car and said like, hey, I'm going to be playing baseball tomorrow. I knew nothing about baseball before I met my husband. Would you come by to a game? And so that's how it all started. And we still have that note somewhere. Like I need to get it matted and like framed and cute where we can actually put it on the wall somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, that's so great because now people don't get notes, Shannon.
I know, there's no such thing.
You would have had a text that you would have never seen again, and you actually have the note. I love
I
that.
do. Somewhere we have the note, and I have the first little card he made for me too on our first date. So those are treasures to me,
Of course they are. Okay, here is a question from Marie in Maplewood, Minnesota. She says, if you could travel back in time to visit one of the mother-daughter duos you wrote about, which one would it be? Isn't that interesting?
It is. You know what? You and I have talked about this, that I include spiritual mothers and daughters here too. And I did a deep dive on Elizabeth and Mary, and you and I have talked about that.
Yeah.
One of my favorites in the New Testament, obviously, when we meet Elizabeth, we first meet her husband, Zechariah, who was a priest, and Israel has gone through 400 years of not hearing anything from God. No angels visiting, no miracles. And I had to think it very discouraging for a lot of people at that point.
Yeah.
So Zachariah is a priest. He is called up to this duty that they do, I think, twice a year, a week at a time, if I've got that right. But anyway, he gets picked for this once in a lifetime opportunity. You know, they draw lots, and he ends up getting chosen to go in to do this special ceremony within the temple. And while he's there, Gabriel comes to visit him, and he and his wife had been barren and, you know, dealing with infertility, probably had given up because they were long past the time that they would have a child. But, you know, the scripture tells us, and Luke wrote this account where he says, they were without blame. They were serving God faithfully. There was nothing in their lives. You know, sometimes people would say back in those times, you know, she's barren because God is judging her or something has happened. And Luke makes it clear that's not what's happening. So Zachariah is then there. Gabriel says to him, like, hey, your prayers have been heard. You're going to have a child. And Gabriel's like, what? And he actually expresses a little bit of doubt, or not Gabriel, Zachariah expresses a little doubt there. And he's thinking, oh my gosh, my wife is way past this. I mean, how is this going to happen? And because of his disbelief, Gabriel actually says to him, you know what, you're going to be mute until this child is actually born, which ended up being John the Baptist. And it comes to fruition. Elizabeth is pregnant. But I always think, because the Bible tells us, like, people are waiting outside, like, what's happening? Why is he in there so long? Can you imagine him coming out and saying, like, the world's craziest game of charades, like, there was an angel and I'm going to have sex with you. Like, I can't think about what that was like. So Elizabeth, way past when she should have been having a baby, finds out she's pregnant. And then Gabriel shows up with Mary, who is her cousin and is a young teenager, we believe, and says to her, you are blessed among women. You are going to have the Messiah. But not only that, and Mary is very like, let it be so. She is faithful and she is trusting and feels humbled and honored by this. But Gabriel also tells her, by the way, your cousin Elizabeth is pregnant. And I love that because I think God put these women together. One who way past should have been having a baby, one who was super young and not expecting to have a baby, had not been with a husband or a man. And he gives them to each other to say, like, you're going to walk through this together. And we know Mary makes this long journey to go see Elizabeth, and that John the Baptist leaps in Elizabeth's womb when Mary comes in, knowing it's the mother of the Savior that has arrived. And so I love to see their relationship and the fact that they both had these incredible pregnancies that I'm sure a lot of people had doubts and questions about what was going on, but they knew this was divine. But he gave them to each other, almost a spiritual mother and daughter, in the sense that they walked through that miraculous time together. So I'd love to meet them both.
Yeah. I've so many thoughts running through my head as you tell that story. One, if you haven't seen the movie about the Nativity, the relationship, it's a beautiful movie, and the relationship between Elizabeth and Mary is captured in the movie. And I always think about those images when I hear the story. But yeah, you're right. I mean, imagine there's a lot of people that didn't believe Mary, probably. I mean, what a crazy story, right? But here was her cousin Elizabeth, who probably was more like an aunt figure to her. And they had each other, and a lot of people were wondering what the heck happened with Elizabeth. They knew that the truth, and they had each other in that way. And I think it's really beautiful. And also the fact that in utero, their children greeted each other and then had this interesting relationship, as we learn later, with John the Baptist and Jesus himself. So just a really beautiful, interconnected family story, surrounded by this amazing, the greatest miracle ever,
Exactly.
Amazing. And also, that you talk so much, Shannon, about how so much that happens in the Bible is a reminder that, God knows what we're going through. And one of the greatest pains that I've had so many friends and family that have dealt with infertility, and it is a very painful experience for people to go through. And so I love that God captures that, in this story, and that we see the pain that for many years Elizabeth and Zachariah went through, and then of course the joy of having this miracle baby. It's just beautiful.
And the perfect timing, because think, John the Baptist came as this forerunner for Christ, was so important in his ministry and laying the groundwork and laying the way for Christ. And that was predicted years before, centuries before. And all of those years that Elizabeth was waiting and praying for a child, there was purpose in that delay. Yes. And I think we see that again and again.
I love that. There was purpose in that delay. there's actually somebody I'm thinking of, and I feel like God wanted you to tell me that.
Well, good. And that's the whole point. I hope that we'll be encouraged by seeing other people's
Wow.
suffering and struggles. Like it's not in vain.
Yes. Wow. Wow. I just got chills up my
Mm.
arms here. This one you answered already. Okay. So what kind of research did the research for your book? This, by the way, is from Rebekah in Ohio. She wants to know if the research for the book actually changed your life. And do you relate to any of the women that you wrote about in the Bible? You did talk about that, but let's talk about, did the research in the book change your life?
You know what? It did, because it made me feel like I know these women personally, which I love because
Okay.
I've known their stories and their Bible stories over the ages. But when you really dig in and look at the scriptures first, that's always going to be my guide. But I've got great people in my life who have been to seminary, who are theologians, who would let me bug them to say, like, what does this verse really mean in the original language, the Hebrew or the Greek? What was the
Mhm.
custom at the time? Would this have been weird for this woman to do this? All of those people have been so helpful to me and really gotten a three-dimensional look at who these women are, so that I feel like they're friends. I feel like, I'm hearing the story of somebody that I know, and it just becomes more alive and more real. I mean, if anything, the research really drove home to me God's faithfulness and his goodness. And again, those universal themes that there's nothing new under the sun. I mean, whatever we suffer is something Christ is familiar with. We're told that he's not a high priest for us who doesn't understand our suffering. He knows what it's like to go through all these earthly things and to be, he's, like I said, he's gone through the worst of the worst that any of us will probably ever face, and then some. So he's not unaware of what we go through as human beings. So the research, if anything, just sort of reminded me of all the promises and the faithfulness, and really encouraged me, like I said, when I was writing during the first wave of the pandemic, to be encouraged and to be hopeful in a world where that often does not make sense.
Mhm.
But I feel like I've made a bunch of new friends through really studying these
Aw,
in depth. I do. And I hope that's
I
how
love
readers
that.
feel too. Like, I get it. I get her story, and I can see that in my own life or a friend's life.
So this is kind of related to that. This is from Robert in New Brunswick, New Jersey. And he says, was there a wow moment or a special moment that you did not anticipate as you were writing this book?
I have to tell you that I learned a lot about Bathsheba. Now, most people, if you even know who she is, she's kind of portrayed as sort of this temptress, that she snared David, who was King David. He gets her pregnant. Her husband's away at war. He calls the husband home to try to make the husband thinks it's his baby. The husband is like, I will not go and sleep with her. My soldiers are on the battlefield, which is where David should have been also. And so he
Wow,
ends
this is so debaucherous. I didn't know
I know,
this
isn't
story.
this crazy? So the husband comes home, won't sleep with his own wife because he doesn't want to betray the men who are away at war. Like I said, where David should have been, and why wasn't he? And so he ends up then telling the military commander to send Bathsheba's husband to the most dangerous front, where he ends up getting killed, and then David marries her. I mean, this is not Dallas and Dynasty on steroids.
For
These people in
sure.
the Bible, these families in the Bible, David did terrible things, and yet God said he's a man after my own heart. And one of the most beautiful things to me is in Psalm 51, where David pours out his heart, like, I have done terrible things. I have sinned against you. Please, please redeem me. Take away my sin, cleanse me, and make me whole. And I love that, because I feel like I've gone to read that sometimes where I've really messed up and feel like God forgave David. He's going to forgive me. He's promised us that. He's already paid for our sins. But I learned so much more about Bathsheba in studying this, because the fact is, there's nothing in scripture that tells us she was seducing or trying to scam David into this relationship, which is kind of how I'd heard the story growing up. There's nothing about that in the Bible. We don't know. There's obviously a huge power differential
Why
that
do you think that happened? Why do you think that this sort of reputation, how did she get this
I
reputation?
don't know. I think it's an easy way to tell the story, like, ooh,
Yeah.
she's out there bathing. She's beautiful. David sees her. He calls her in. They have this thing. We don't know that she ever had real choice in the matter. I don't know. We don't know the extent of how their relationship went down. We just know, like, when you're summoned by the king to come and your husband's away at war, maybe there's news of your husband. You don't
Sure.
know. You're gonna go. Was she willing or not? I don't know. But what I found in her life is that, first of all, there was a lot more on the front end that needed to be clarified. But on the back end, she's actually the mother of King Solomon. And we see a lot about her motherhood and how she helps him ascend to the throne. And the fact that this is the man who ends up being the wisest man, we're told, of all time. And, think about, she raised King Solomon. When God went to him and said, what do you want? He didn't say palaces, fame, fortune, money, whatever. He said, I want wisdom. And God said, I'm not only going to give you that because you asked for that, but because you didn't ask for all the other stuff, I'm going to give you that. Bathsheba's the mother of this man who was a wonderful servant and king over Israel. So I'd forgotten that she was Solomon's mom. And
Yeah.
we see them together at the end of the story. And I think, gosh, there's much more to mine of her role of motherhood. Like I said, the book also has mothers and sons. And we see her in that place as the mother to King Solomon. And I got to know her a lot better and felt like she hasn't always gotten a fair rap, I don't think.
Maybe that's the lesson, right? A lot of people don't get a fair rap. We got to look at, the whole thing. I love it. I love it. Was there a specific moment in your life, and this, by the way, is from Lisa in Egg Harbor, Wisconsin. She wants to know if there was a specific moment in your life when you realized what your calling was.
I've always been a news junkie. Like I said, my dad didn't really think that was a real job. Working in TV news, he was like, that's like showbiz. So he wasn't really excited about that idea. So like I said earlier, he asked me, please go to law school or med school, one of those. I know you can do the curriculum, and I think it's important for you to get your education. He was like, I don't want to hear about any guys before that. I don't want to hear about marriage or boys or anything. Of course, I met my husband in college, and then we got married in law school. But I never could get over sort of that current events pull to stories and news and history unfolding in real time. And so after I'd practiced for a few years, I really couldn't shake it. And I said, I'm going to go do this internship at a local TV station at the age of 29. Everybody else was like 20. And they called me grandma intern. And I joke, like I said, that I had my midlife crisis then. But the minute I got into that newsroom, and trust me, I was doing grunt work. I was like, making coffee, answering the phone. This makes me sound really old, clipping things out of the newspaper, together story files and stuff. But I loved it. I mean, the minute I got in that newsroom, you got the police scanners going, you got live TV, you got producers and cameramen and reporters and anchors running around. And live TV, as you know, there's no safety net. It's a little dangerous. We can get ourselves in trouble sometimes. But I immediately was like, this is what I want to do. And it was not easy. It was a long path to get there. But I think that walking into the newsroom and having that experience made me feel like, okay, this passion that I have about doing this, I prayed about it. My husband and I prayed about it, got counsel for like a year before I decided to really jump off a cliff and leave my legal career and do this. But I had assurance, and that was important because I got fired from my first TV job and told that I was the worst person on TV and would never make it.
Wow.
And so, that was humiliating. But again, staying humble is good. That was really painful. And I think if I hadn't done a lot of soul searching prior to making that career leap, I would have really been floundering. And there were times I really questioned whether I'd done the right thing, but I had really tried to pray about this and seek about whether this is what I was going to do. And I feel so blessed, Rachel, and I feel so blessed to do this job every day. I feel privileged, but a blessing. And I'm so glad. Sometimes it's scary to leave your career behind and try something new, but I'm really grateful I had the opportunity. And I do believe this is what, at least for this period of my life, of what God's assigned me to do.
How did you get through? Here's this career that you've prayed about. You think, I'm going to make this leap, and then you get fired. I mean, I can't imagine someone firing Shannon Bream. That didn't actually happen like that, did it?
Oh yeah. Here's the thing is that I went and interned at this station. Again, I hid it from my law firm as long as I could. And finally, towards the end of my internship, where I would go out with any reporter or photographer, and they were kind people who I could do nothing for them, but they would let me tag along and shadow. And a couple of these people have gone on to be superstars. Sage Steele at ESPN.
I know Sage. Oh my God, I know Sage.
Yes. And Elaine Quijano, who ended up moderating a vice presidential debate and has had an amazing career in media. And both of them were so kind, like, you clearly don't know what you're doing. And they like kind of took me under their wing and showed me how to write a story and how to find an interview and all these kinds of things. They were so kind, and they've remained friends over the years just because they had nothing to gain from helping me. And I cherish that. But so at the end of my internship, I went to the boss there and said, I'm leaving my law firm. And he's like, no one's offered you a job. I'm like technicality. And so I went back to my firm and was like, guys, I'm leaving. Most of the partners thought that I was probably crazy, and I probably was, but I had a couple of them who said to me, there was something else I always wanted to do, and I feel like I missed my window. I missed my opportunity. So I'm going to be cheering for you. So I went back, and the boss said a couple of weeks later, like, listen, we had this thing open up. It's a fraction of what I was making at the law firm. It was 2 a.m. to 11 a.m. And I literally went in, answered phones, made coffee, listened to the police scanners, watched out for news. I started writing scripts for the morning anchors for the morning show. Then somebody left and I started working prompter, which is the worst because if you're not properly trained, you know how important the prompter is.
Yes.
My shows with like, let's have an applause, round of applause for the prompt operator, because they are kind of like your lifeline to everything.
No, it's true.
So, I mean, then somebody left, and they made me a producer. I mean, I literally just was learning as I went. And finally, one day after months of me bugging my boss, he said, listen, we're going to start if everyone is in the hospital with appendicitis and broken legs, and we have a story that breaks, and we're going to send you if there's no one else available. So I started doing that and getting a few things on tape and learning. And I was a few months into that, and my boss, I came in one day and he was gone and his boss was gone, and everyone who was experienced in the newsroom were like, this is the worst thing in the world. There's been a complete management change. And when the new people come in, they want their people. So we're all getting fired. And I was like, we're not all getting fired. I'm making no money and doing like 10 jobs now. And I have a great attitude and I love it. And 2 weeks into the new guy, he called me in on a Friday afternoon, and the head of HR was sitting there. And I was like, I'm getting promoted.
No.
But pro tip, if the head of HR is sitting there, you're not getting promoted. And I got this speech from the guy who was like, I don't know why anyone put you on TV. Who thought that was a good idea? You don't know what you're doing. You are terrible. You will never make it in this business. And I hope you're a better lawyer than you are a reporter, because you need to go back to doing that. And I was like, good day to you, sir. I mean, it's so embarrassing. And in every TV studio in the world, there are these soundproof edit bays where you go to edit your stories. And I locked myself in one and cried for 2 hours, like called everybody that I loved, like, I'm such a failure. This is so embarrassing. And it took me months and months and months and months to get an interview, because that was my very first TV job. I didn't really have much to put on my resume. And there was a lot of searching during that time. Like, God, I know that there is a lesson in this, like there is in every valley. So if you could just drop it on me, move on.
Do it now.
Not how it works. So I learned a lot through that, though. And it really kicked me out of the nest and made me think, are you going to get better at this? Are you going to prove him wrong? Not out of spite, but by doing a better job. And so I'm thankful to him, and I clearly it was part of God's plan to remind me to stay humble, to work hard, to get better. And I think there's always room for improvement.
So did you ever get that Julia Roberts moment where you had to go back and say, big mistake?
I get asked that a lot, and I've never used the guy's name because I'm like, listen, he really did help me in the long run, do me a favor. Well, not long after that, nice. My husband and I were out for a run we lived in Tampa at the time, and there's this Bayshore Drive area that's all along the Hillsborough Bay, and people run and rollerblade, do all that stuff. And we had gone out there for a run, and this guy who had fired me was coming towards us and passed by us, and he had a really funky t-shirt. And so I waited a while. And once we got past that, I said to Sheldon, my husband, hey, did you see the guy with the, I described the weird t-shirt, and he was like, yeah, that's kind of funky. And I was like, and I said the name, and he's like, I'll be right back. And I said, oh no, because listen, my husband is so chill, but maybe like Will Smith. I don't know. I still want to say for real. But your husband, I'm sure, is very protective of your honor and of you too. And he knew how much that had hurt me. So I basically jumped on his back to stop him from going to. He would not touch anybody, but I think he might have something to say. And so he never went back to that guy, and I've never seen him again. But it's just.
But can I just ask you this? I know so, but I just have to get this. So when you saw him, were you Shannon Bream at Fox News?
No. This was only a few weeks after he fired me.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. No, there's never been a moment where I've run into him now. No, he doesn't know this version of me. He just knows the terrible reporter version who needed to start over.
Okay. So, well, listen, I hope he's, watches you on Fox News at night, knows that he was part of this journey. He was part of this journey that led to.
And you know what? Honestly, if he hadn't fired me, I don't think I would have ended up at Fox, and I wouldn't have had a chance to write these books and make friends like you, Rachel. So it all works together for good.
That's right. God is great. That is for sure.
I think I'm out of books to sign, by the way, unless I start signing these copies over here, but I will keep signing. And people, by the way, can get the book. If you're already, signed on and following with us today, then you know how to find the book. But it's, you can go to signedshannonbook.com.
Oh, yes, we should do that. Yes.
Yeah, signedshannonbook.com. And if you've already signed up and purchased your book and you're joining us today, then your signed copy will soon be on the way. So thank you. I love getting people's questions. And Rachel,
can we do one last question?
Yeah. Of course.
There was some we didn't answer. Let's do one more.
Okay.
This is from Sally in Bluffton, South Carolina, and it's good. She said, what message could mothers and daughters of the Bible have for me, a mother of 3 boys?
Mm-hmm. Well, there are some stories in this book that also involve mothers and sons. Like I talked about, you got Bathsheba and King Solomon, who ended up being the wisest man ever. Their story is there, but also Rebekah, who, if you remember, she married Isaac. And again, this is a story of infertility for like 20 years, I think it was, with them. She finally gets pregnant with twins, and it's Jacob and Esau. And again, if we want to talk about a dysfunctional family, we see how Rachel or Rebekah does not trust what God has told her, it appears, because she does a lot of scheming and conniving to try to give her one son an advantage over the other son. And it's just, I think through her story, we learn a lot about what not to do, probably.
Yeah.
And it's sad to me because you think about these boys that they had, and Isaac, the father, had his favorite son, and Rebekah had her favorite son. But I talk about in the book about what if this family had tried to work together through the differences the boys had, and what about all of us who, I touch on the college admissions scandal and other mothers out there who've tried to take shortcuts for their kids because we all want our kids to have the best advantages. But Rebekah went about this in a really difficult way that really fractured that family in many deep ways. But there are mothers and sons who are positive, and those we can learn from their negative example in the book too. But plenty of sons are in the book too.
Awesome. Well, Shannon, I just want to thank you for letting me be part of this awesome book signing live and all these awesome questions. But also, you saved me from making dinner tonight too. So that was kind of
night. You're gonna have pizza. I'm gonna have Chick-fil-A. It's all good.
It's all good.
Thank you for all of your time, Rachel. You're part of our special that's going to be on Fox as well about this, and on Fox Nation. And you've been kind enough to do the podcast too. So I should be paying for the pizza tonight for the family.
Yeah, no, don't you worry. My girls, I told you, we're really excited to be part of the show. So thanks for having us as part of that special. It'll be me and my daughters with Shannon and all the other guests. So thanks so much. Shannon, you're awesome.
You are too, my friend. And you are such a beautiful model of faith and action every single day. And I think that's why I feel like you're my sister.
I feel like you're my sister too. Love you, Shannon. And bye, everybody.
Bye. Thank you for joining us.
Hey, this is John Acuff, New York Times best-selling author of 7 books and someone who's done a live signing. If you like the one you just watched, make sure you check out our YouTube channel. It's full of amazing authors having great conversations and signing books for viewers just like you. So make sure you subscribe, and thanks for watching today.